Hey, check it out. I finally learned how to firebend. I haven't really mastered it yet, but imagine the things I could do with this. It could be life-changing. I could save the world, maybe, or something else. I could even... What? Huh. Hi, my name is Bob, and let's get this out of the way real quick. The Last Airbender movie was, well, a thing. Everyone's talked about it, every joke has been made, every point has been proven. This isn't another video about how bad it is, even though it is pretty bad. Instead, I want to talk about the discography of Avatar, and where it stands heading forward into the future of streaming platforms and creative differences. Many companies in the past decade have been working hard to grab as many unique names and IPs as possible. It's a never-ending battle of which company gets to remaster, remake, reboot, or simply put an old thing on their platform. Platforms like Netflix struggle with the latter, with shows like Friends having a $100 million bounty on their head, only to extend its existence until, like, another year, inevitably moving the binge-loved classic to another streaming competitor of a different name. Netflix has lost and gained a lot of classics the last few years. They lost The Office and Friends, and now they have Seinfeld. So basically whoever owns it gets to do whatever the heck they want with it. Sometimes the owner owns a lot of things. Too many things. Disney is an example of an absolute monopoly of media with gigantic movie and cartoon brands. At this rate, their slice of the pie might only get bigger as time goes on, with more stake in each of their individual futures like Star Wars, Avengers, Simpsons. It's pretty weird. Avatar, however, is currently owned by Nickelodeon. One thing I could respect about Nick in the early days was their ability to take risks. A lot of their shows would be made for kids, but would have adult themes, jokes, and some pretty wild stuff. Avatar was one of those shows in the early 2000s, and it really paid off. A show that occasionally had dark themes and undertones. However, Avatar was recently added to the Netflix catalog in America. Again, after years of the Avatar cartoons not being watchable anywhere except maybe Amazon Prime or cable TV. It reminds me of when I took a trip to Canada back in 2019. I noticed you could watch all 3 seasons of the original show, but I kid you not, the second I crossed the border, they vanished. So I held hope that one day, the Avatar would return. A year later it did. The following year, the original series creators started Avatar Studios, with the hopes of expanding the universe of Avatar in the years ahead. It's a new company headed by Mike and Bryan, the creators of the original show. It's pretty exciting stuff, and it gave me some hope, despite the many barriers they've had to deal with in the past decade. The news was quickly compared with the recently confirmed Netflix cast for an original live-action series-based TV show, with the occasional far and few announcements leaving many people hopeful, but equally worried about the lack of further communication with the original showrunners. I'll talk more about that later, but Avatar's recent transition to Netflix actually works, because a less serialized method where you can binge multiple episodes in one night is, in my opinion, one of the best ways to watch it. So its recent comeback in popularity really reflects that. It's interesting, with Netflix being one of the first and most dominant streaming services in the world, literally kicking Blockbuster to the curb and rubbing it in their faces, they have an interesting way of sparking interest in new original shows like The Midnight Gospel, BoJack Horseman, and also reviving old TV shows and movies simply by adding it to their platform. It's a common occurrence in the industry to call it the Netflix effect. Breaking Bad, for example, was a show on the verge of cancellation that really reaped the rewards after its season 4 release. You also might know that if it wasn't for iTunes, The Office wouldn't have been the cult hit it is today. So in other words, the 2010s just really proved that the future was streaming. This of course wasn't the case for Avatar, with its entire run so far being on cable TV, and staying there for a pretty long time. In fact, I remember growing up waiting for episodes of both the original and Korra to come out each week. They felt like some of the last shows I was genuinely looking forward to weekly. I mean, there's still plenty of shows to look forward to, but some might argue it's not the same. Some might disagree. So, what does that mean for Avatar? A show just barely left behind in a medium that's drastically changed the way we watch TV and movies in the decade ahead. Because as much as we all say we want new stuff, it's hard not to think about reboots considering the past 5 years alone. It's the kind of thing that makes money whether people like it or not, so that's the bottom line. So it gets me thinking about what Avatar might do in the coming years, or what they should do. What could happen? By the way, if you had to choose any element, which element do you want? Leave a comment, and I'll hit up my buddy Mr. Lion Turtle. I think I'd like to be a waterbender, you know? Bending the earth is tempting. Heating up my soup is also tempting, but I kinda like the idea of just pouring a Monster energy drink in my mouth from 20 feet away, or like saving the world or whatever. But anyway, before I talk about the future, I'd like to talk about the beginning. Long ago, the Fire Nation attacked Yeah, only the Avatar could do it. Funny little bald kid with a stupid arrow on his head. Oh. Hey. I didn't mean that. Oh, like when Bryan began work on the series at Nickelodeon Animation Studios in California. According to Bryan, the program was created in the spring of 2001 when he took an old sketch of a balding middle-aged man and reimagined the character as a child. The show's protagonist Aang was originally going to be a farmer kid with a robot sidekick named Momo Thuri. In a post-apocalyptic world 1,000 years in the future, the arrow in his head was less about being the Avatar and more so a trick to blend in with the herd of supernatural animals around him. The idea was eventually scrapped, but after some time went by, another idea was born, something they thought was even better. He drew the character herding a bison in the sky and showed the sketch to Mike. Their partnership worked pretty well. The pilot episode of Avatar is loosely based off of a shipwreck in 1900s Antarctica. Ernest Shackleton captained the ship of Endurance that trekked the icy oceans in 1915, until suddenly it sinks. A 28-man crew journeyed by foot and boat for months in the cold, snowy temperatures, and the show's creators were fascinated by the idea of someone surviving the harshest of temperatures and conditions, and that's where the idea of the boy stuck in the iceberg was born. A boy trapped in ice for 100 years, much like Shackleton's crew, where every single one of them survived. The characters themselves were inspired by the many sketches of Michael DiMartino, but Nickelodeon wanted their next generation of shows to be based from a child's perspective, so the old man swiftly developed into a child with the power of all four elements, a natural airbender destined to save the world. So the airbender boy with the arrow in his head would become a figurehead of a transitional period of Nick shows having child-centric POVs in the early to late 2000s. Sorry if this is a spoiler, but it is kinda cool to see older Aang and Korra though. It gives you a vague idea of what it could have been. Regardless though, I think fans are more than satisfied by the end result of the original show, especially if you watched it when you were young. Each type of bender was given their own unique style of martial arts, acknowledging the strengths and weaknesses of each element. The choreography of each episode was carefully developed with a surprising attention to detail as time went on, going as far as renting out a karate studio where they frame by frame recorded each fight with professional fighters practicing Chinese martial arts karate. They had a consultant that would judge their form, and even had actual events that the staff would show up to. At the end of each event, they would turn all the skills they learned into intricate storyboards and sketch animations created by Studio Mir in South Korea that were fluid and visually pleasing to watch. The showrunner's actually living in South Korea for about 3 months or so. Avatar also has a lot of cultural influences in Asian art and mythology, Chinese art and history, Korean clothing and folktales, Japanese anime, Hinduism, Taoism, Buddhism, and yoga. Along with martial arts, they also had a trained cultural consultant and translator to maintain accuracy in the calligraphy and in its reimagined cartoon depictions of traditional art, history, music, and ancient backgrounds. You can translate the kanji on every poster and sign in the show into native Chinese. And there's a lot of other interesting cultural stuff too. One of the creators is also an avid fan of yoga and claims to have been hit with a sudden burst of inspiration after being, quote, drenched in sweat after a yoga session. I think that's kind of funny. Another kind of funny thing is that before making and producing Avatar, apparently DiMartino used to work at Film Roman. More specifically, it's the studio that largely contributed to the creation of Family Guy, meaning he actually wrote and directed multiple episodes of Family Guy before working on Avatar. Oh, and also King of the Hill. Respect. And it's interesting that Family Guy was kind of the start of a timeline that would lead to the creation of a wildly contrasting, spiritual, and grounded cartoon like Avatar. The word Avatar itself comes from Sanskrit, which means descent. In Hinduism, the gods manifest themselves into avatars to restore balance on Earth, usually during a period of great evil. This idea became the core foundation of Avatar's thematic message of good versus evil, and after just 2 weeks of planning, they eventually pitched it to Nickelodeon. And this was their big moment. Nickelodeon was ready to hear their idea. And truthfully, the idea had been brewing for much longer. They both went to the same school in Rhode Island in 1995. The two of them knew each other long enough that they wanted to come up with a show together. When pitching the show, a Nickelodeon executive said that a typical pitch is usually somewhere around 5 to 7 minutes, but apparently they spent hours talking about their project. They were so passionate about its characters and plot that the VP of Nickelodeon approved the idea just because of how excited they were. And also he thought it was a cool idea. It's great too, because throughout development they had a very neatly planned 3-season pitch, where the show would have a very clear beginning, middle, and end. It's awesome because I personally love shows that have an ending, like Breaking Bad, The Good Place, Mr. Robot. It's a lot better than a show going on for 20 seasons and asking yourself, wait a minute, is that still on? Because the more I read about the show's origins, the more my respect for the Avatar series grows. I even have a newfound appreciation of its careful and grounded articulation of inspired culture, characters, and traditional storytelling with a unique serialized twist. But in the bigger picture of things, as we head into the 20s of entertainment, I'm curious about the legacy of Avatar. If you're a a fan of both Avatar cartoons, you probably know that the original show aired on Nickelodeon TV from 2005 to 2008. After the Avatar movie in 2010, The Legend of Korra was created in 2012, basically out of spite. They said, we can do this better, and they did it. That show ended in 2014, with the last couple episodes only being watchable on the Nickelodeon website due to claims of declining ratings. Audiences believed the show was starting to reach its creative peak, but Nick disagreed. There was a bit of controversy about why they ended it. The show's fans were admittedly divided, some preferring the original and others feeling the show thrives on its representation and its new set of characters. Many also feel they prefer Aang as the main protagonist, often noting that the Last Airbender's impending goal of defeating the Fire Lord had a more natural progression than Korra's ever-changing goals each season. Spoilers ahead, by the way. But with the Legend of Korra being set long after the end of the 100-Year War, some feel that Korra's motivation and temperament is a near polar opposite to Aang's calm demeanor throughout the show. I personally found the contrast to be pretty interesting, because every Avatar past and future is bound to have different experiences and motivations. I also really like Tenzin and the other characters they introduced. Not to mention the historical allegories and spiritual stuff later on are pretty interesting too. With all this in mind, I do feel that Korra evolves and learns a lot about herself throughout the show. But I digress. I mention this because I recently rewatched both of the original Avatar cartoons, and in my opinion, they hold up pretty well. Following the cycle of the Avatars past, the next Avatar could very possibly be from the Earth Kingdom. It's also possible we could restart the cycle with a firebender. If we do get a new animated series, I'd love to see what they come up with. Honestly, it could be anything. Because recent news has come to shed light on Avatar Studios' plan to use top-of-the-line new CG technology and traditional 2D to the likes of Spider-Verse in the coming years. Except it won't be a comic book style per se, but it will have similar implementation and workflow. Stuff like Mitchell's vs. the Machines, Arcane, Dragon Prince, Claws, Beastars, Charlie Brown, and other stuff similar. Maybe animated in 2s, I'm not sure. But I do know this could be potentially groundbreaking technology that could open the door for multiple new cartoons. Avatar composer Jeremy Zuckerman even hinted that what he's seen them work on so far is inspired, gorgeous, and super high quality. Plus it seems pretty legit, because you can actually find job postings at Viacom for motion capture and look of picture experts in technology and animation. So if anyone's watching, you know, jobs. I'm pretty excited about it, with 100% confirmation that new original animated content will definitely happen, but it could be a while from now. The thing is, apparently Nickelodeon and Viacom CBS have partnered up to create Paramount Plus, a streaming service that has SpongeBob and dozens of Nick exclusive content. They let Netflix have a few Nickelodeon things, they threw them a bone I guess, but this could also mean Netflix is gonna lose Avatar. Again, like for the 3rd time now, but it even has iCarly, the new one, too. So with that being said, it's been announced that new animated Avatar content, while it's definitely happening, is still years away from finishing development. In fact, they even said they have an ambitious multi-tiered plan that could take 20 years. Damn. Not to mention, this means for the first time ever, a new Avatar cartoon by Bryan and Mike probably won't air on Nickelodeon cable TV at all. Instead, it'll set a precedent for a new age of watching all of our favorite rebooted cartoons on phones, tablets, computers, and consoles. However, even though you might need a subscription to Paramount Plus, this does mean we could have a CG film, a new Avatar series, or a few. It'll expand the universe like crazy. And while I am cautiously optimistic about spin-offs and reboots of any kind, Avatar forever, baby! So I'm looking forward to it, but it could be ages, even years after the Netflix thing, so I don't know. What do you think? While the future may seem uncertain for the next couple years, the original Avatar TV show, however, is a classic. This show has the perfect mix of comedic elements and impending doom. Every single character has fear, doubts, and struggles that you can seriously empathize with, while at the same time being genuinely funny for all ages. It's not really a show just made for kids or for adults. Someone could watch it at 8 years old or 18 and feel the same way they did back then, having seen it multiple times. Back then, it was watching reruns on TV, or watching the finale come out the day of. Flash forward to 10 years and I'm streaming it wherever I can. And the payoff is brilliant. But Aang's journey is also an important part of the show's lore. Arguably even more important to see the rich character development, world building, and progressively paced storytelling evolve over time. You know what they say, it's about the journey, not the destination. Well, I'm not sure Sokka would agree with that.
Walking stinks. Hey, Sokka's instincts. Would you mind?
Okay, I get it.
Whatever.
He is taunting us.
When making a show like this, you have to root for the characters and you have to understand their motivations, inching closer and closer to the anxiety-inducing, world-saving finale. And I can proudly say I love this show for what it does. It scratches every itch in all the best ways from start to finish. It's a humble world, similar to the likes of ancient times. It feels like the traditional story of a hero saving the world, but you get to experience every little town and nuance, including including the bigger annoyances and the smaller victories that snowball into helping them towards their goal. The world they live in is filled with hybrid animals of every type imaginable, like lion turtles, badger moles, sand sharks, raven eagles, goat dogs, frog squirrels, and flying bison. Pretty much any two combined animals you can think of probably exist. Yo, hit me up, I got some ideas. It's one of my favorite things about rewatching these shows. The first episode leads with Aang, the last airbender of the Southern Air Temple who was frozen for 100 years after fleeing from his home. The big ball of ice sort of being an externalized representation of his emotions and fears. Quite literally, frozen in fear. Seriously though, the internal and external struggles they face throughout the show are sometimes very nuanced and interesting. It's why I say watching it as an adult is just as good, and I might have even liked them better watching them as an adult, because you grow up with a deeper understanding of what all of this really meant, and what it means for the characters to go through something at such a young age, and through such a dark time. After feeling isolated from his friends, feeling self-doubt, and being genuinely terrified of this kind of responsibility. I mean, he was 12 years old. It's kind of messed up. Actually, he was technically 100. Even if you haven't seen the show, you probably knew some of this already. You also probably know that this world is made up of 4 different elements: water, earth, fire, and air. If you're starting to feel like this is kind of obvious already. Shut up. Really though, this show is pretty impressive for its time, with its gorgeous art, music, character development, and story. Avatar is a very visually appealing show, and in my opinion, it's kind of why this type of show is best presented with animation, especially the spiritual journeys and the bending of the elements being vital to the show's progressing nature. Looking back, I really appreciate Avatar, because there's plenty of shows these days that seem to have a very surface level plot for every episode, self-proclaimed adult cartoons. This doesn't mean I don't have a lot of respect for animators of seemingly lazy shows. They're often underpaid and overworked. The Legend of Korra, however, is far from lazy. Comparing the two, it might not be everyone's favorite, but in fact it's a direct response to the bad taste left in the mouths of Bryan and Mike after that absolute of a movie. Korra was a way of proving they could make something much better than The Last Airbender, and they did. Season 1 of Korra, in my opinion, solidifies itself as a classic, but this really feels like a widescreen 16:9 aspect ratio revival with whopping fresh, beautiful scenery, great characters. There's also, of course, struggles that come with great responsibility, remorse, regret, and family. It was a show that unfortunately had its budget cut during its final season. They had to find creative workarounds and did their best to not be discouraged by the show's finale being moved exclusively to the Nick website. It's a bummer. I feel like the show deserved better, but despite this, it left a solid impression on a lot of people. No one could have predicted the cultural impact of both shows years after their endings, being great examples of how to make a cartoon that all ages can enjoy. I might be biased, but I do of course like the original show a tiny bit better because of the nostalgia, but I still love them both very much, and I respect them a lot. Cartoons that really broke the ice, the glass ceiling, and made some cool, new, innovative stuff that's still relevant and fun to watch at any age, at any time.
Water. Water. Earth. Fire. Air. Long ago, the 4 nations lived together.
Alright, fine, I'll talk about the movie, but only because I think it's important to understanding the timeline of Avatar, and that includes the bad stuff. Also, I'm not gonna lie, I kinda do want to talk about it, just a little bit. But you said you're not gonna talk about it? I watched it again recently, because every time I watched it in the past, I always spaced out or got distracted. Having seen it again recently, being much older and knowing what I know now, I think it's... I'll be honest, I've been trying to think of good things about this movie. I'm really struggling. I really am. The casting's not good, and the special effects are a bit subpar, which is ironic considering a year before Avatar came out. Well, Avatar came out. In comparison to one of the most visually appealing, technologically impressive, innovative, and award-winning top earners of the century, I think it's pretty clear who's the winner. I mean, I'm not gonna stand here and pretend I know even one person's name from this movie, even though I've seen it multiple times, but it's watchable. Avatar is definitely better than Avatar, and it made a lot of money. This movie is hard to watch. Like, I thought watching it again, it wouldn't be as bad as people said, but it's very difficult. I can put aside a few weird name changes like Aang, Sokka, Avatar, Agni Ki, but you could also argue these are symptoms of a movie that takes itself way too seriously. I mean, I'm just saying, I would respect this movie just a little bit more if it embraced itself as being a straight-to-TV Nickelodeon live-action movie, like Best Player or something, but it tries way too hard to be more than that. In return, it makes the dialogue incredibly stilted, and the story itself nothing more than a milquetoast carbon copy of the original, with a heavy reliance on exposition shortcuts and constant time wasting that's just uncomfortable. And actually, let me correct myself, it's worse than milquetoast, because at least milquetoast can be half decent sometimes. I found a pretty good recipe online, I'll put a link in the description, because I never thought to have put cinnamon on it. It's pretty, what was I saying? Oh, anyway, this movie is more like soggy bread water. I mean, honestly though, if you've been on YouTube long enough, you probably already know that this movie has a lot of problems. Problems that have been thoroughly talked about. Every frame of this movie has been analyzed, laughed at, and deeply criticized. It's every film student's favorite example of a genuinely bad film. Even to this day, people are still making video essays about it. So I'm not sure how much I'll say that hasn't already been said, but I do have a few things to complain about, because I'm a really big fan of this show. It's one of those movies that over-explains and under-explains at the same time. And because of this, the pacing in the movie is all over the place. Ironically, it breaks one of the biggest rules of cinema, which is show not tell, but also it sometimes shows too much. It's hard to tell what's important and what isn't, because everything in this movie has this really brooding, dark atmosphere to it. Zuko barely has its scar, it's more like a scratch. I've gotten bigger scratches than that from my cat, so. Katara doesn't have her hair loopies, which is fine, but more importantly, she doesn't have her mother's necklace. Sokka never really gets to use his boomerang. When he does use it, it just doesn't feel rewarding in any way. Because the lack of emotional investment in every single character in this movie has me convinced that Sokka and Sokka are two totally different people. The fun-loving and clever Sokka from the cartoon is an entirely different person who's kinda depressing, unfunny, and mostly pointless to the greater narrative. It's not about how accurate it is to the show, it's just how little it used the resources from the show to make it something just as good, if not better. But it's definitely not better. Nothing about the characters or the story really have any reason for emotional investment. They barely use Appa, and when they do, he looks scary. And so does Momo. Everything is just so dark and sad all the time. Not to mention the Fire Lord is not the ominous presence he was in the cartoon. Something I loved about the cartoon is that you don't even see the Fire Lord's face until season 3. It makes it even better by having Fire Lord Ozai be played by Mark Hamill. But in the movie, he's just kinda there, and he's not scary at all. Revealing the Fire Lord right away wouldn't normally be a problem. Lots of villains in movies and TV shows show up in the same vein, but it doesn't work here because he's really lame and uninteresting as an antagonist. And I hate to say it, but so is everyone else in this movie. Their motivations are often unclear and inconsistent. They just go from point A to point B with the most cookie-cutter dialogue imaginable when they get there. There's no bigger reason for all of this, and the smaller stuff doesn't really matter either. Because there's little to no subtext, and the dialogue is incredibly grating. It's just like a really boring retelling of Avatar, and the only redeemable part about it is that sometimes it's funny, but for the wrong reasons. The original plan was for this to be a trilogy, and honestly, I can't even imagine that. I mean, they'd probably keep changing names, like Toph would probably be Toph or Tooth. And I guess Azula would be like Zoloft. But now its reputation is impossible to repair, because people had to watch this in a movie theater with the expectations of a $150 million budget. Let me say that again just to be clear. $150 million! That is insane for a movie that turned out like this. I mean, I get it. Trying to turn 20 episodes of a TV show season into a movie probably has its fair share of challenges, but they made it seem like it was impossible when it really isn't. It not only sets a bad example for live-action remakes, but apparently the behind the scenes was incredibly frustrating as well. I don't even think the creators wanted this movie to be done in the first place, but it had to be done, I guess. Not to mention the showrunners consistently tried to communicate with the creators of the movie, but it basically seemed like every time Mike and Bryan had feedback, Shyamalan and his crew would put it in the quote-unquote special filing cabinet. They were basically just screaming into the void. It's crazy too, because the makers of the movie tried to tell them that they should be grateful that their creation is being made into a movie, that somehow providing regularly scheduled and completely normal feedback means that they're entitled or ungrateful. They insisted their names be left out of that project, and their wish was granted. It's completely ridiculous, because of course you're not going to be grateful when the thing you made had literally none of your input at all. Avatar had an entire cartoon to work off of, and a talented team of people who could have helped make this movie better, but of course they just didn't, and getting the amount of backlash that it still gets to this day, it says a lot that if Avatar ever takes the live action route again, like this Netflix thing, it needs to be completely different, and it needs to have better communication, or it just can't happen at all. You know? Like if I was making a reboot of Avatar, I don't see why you wouldn't trust their input. It's like if El Camino had no feedback from Vince Gilligan. It just doesn't make any sense. And I won't lie, it's a little concerning seeing the recent pattern of stuff being converted to live action. Sometimes they do it right, and it's great. Then sometimes you get Death Note, or Cowboy Bebop.
Sounds to me like blackmail.
Dad, you are black and you are mad.
We have to find the butterfly man. Boo! Danger, danger!
I'm sad about that. Any cartoon being adapted into a movie has reason for legitimate concern, seeing its recent track record. There's no way to know for sure how it's gonna turn out. However, regarding the Netflix show, there is one possibly redeemable thing about it. That being the casting actually being culturally accurate to the show. The movie, wasn't. It seems like something that Bryan and Mike are happy with, and honestly I am too. Because that means at the very least the bar can't possibly go any lower than the movie. And I know I shouldn't be too quick to say that, but I have to admit, it is kinda cool to see who they casted. Some of them I actually recognize. In fact, one of my favorite actors, Paul Sun-Hyung Lee, is gonna be a part of the Netflix adaptation. He previously played the character of Appa in the Korean-Canadian-based show Kim's Convenience, a show that I thought was pretty good. Funny coincidence that Appa means dad in Korean, and in Avatar, Appa is Aang's bison. In Kim's Convenience, he plays the dad and owner of a family-run convenience store, both in the show and also in the play that it's based off of. The TV show being a direct adaptation of the Korean-Canadian family in the play. But in the new show, he's playing Uncle Iroh, a character I absolutely adore from the cartoon. The irony of this, however, is that Kim's Convenience was recently alleged by the cast of the show to be a toxic work environment. The show recently being cancelled after season 5 with little to no warning in an attempt to make a spin-off show about the white lady who runs the car lot? What the fuck? The actors claimed there was a concerning lack of representation in the writer's room. Not to mention the cast was often ghosted and talked down to, paid poorly, locked in contracts, constant disagreements, super high expectations, not giving them proper credit, and everyone who put their blood, sweat, and tears into it was so disheartened by its sudden ending. Like, I'm pretty sure the network probably wanted to make more, but I guess the creators didn't. And I just mention this because I hope the Netflix show, with its more accurate cultural representation this time around, that hopefully, maybe its behind the scenes won't be nearly as bad as this or The Last Airbender. Because I'd hate to see Paul Sun-Hyung Lee repeating history with another negative on-set experience. Because it doesn't matter how good your cast is, it's what you do with what you have. They got one part of it right, but we all know it's not just about that. It has to have good writing, and it needs to be a somewhat positive experience for them, or it will reflect in their work. You know what I mean? It's just stuff like this that makes me extra cautious about being excited for this Netflix attempt, especially after hearing that Bryan and Mike are no longer involved in the project. At the moment, the reasons for leaving are unclear from an outsider's perspective. They haven't really been talking about it in interviews or anything. But they did, however, release a letter to fans of the show about how they feel going forward, and if it's okay with you, I'd like to read it. I have to hope there's some positive we can take out of it. And with these guys literally making Avatar, I think it's worth hearing them out and giving them the attention and respect they deserve. Open letter to Avatar: The Last Airbender fans. Many of you have been asking me for an update about the Avatar live-action Netflix series. I can finally tell you that I am no longer involved with the project. In June of this year, after 2 years of development work, Bryan and I made the difficult decision to leave the production. When Bryan and I signed on to this project in 2018, we were hired as executive producers and showrunners. In a joint announcement for the series, Netflix said that it was committed to honoring our vision for this retelling to support us on creating the series, and we expressed how excited we were for the opportunity to be at the helm. Unfortunately, things did not go as we hoped. Look, things happen, productions are challenging, unforeseen events arise, plans have to change, and when those things have happened at other points during my career, I try to be like an air nomad and adapt. I did my best to go with the flow, no matter what obstacle was put in my way, but even an air nomad knows when it's time to cut their losses and move on. I started to reevaluate what is truly important in my life and what I wanted to do with what's left of it. I took some advice from Uncle Iroh. I looked inward and started asking myself the big question, who are you? And what do you want? I also sought wisdom from Stoic philosophers who were big on differentiating between what is within our control and what isn't. I realized I couldn't control the creative direction of the series, but I could control how I responded. So I chose to leave the project. It was the hardest professional decision I ever had to make, and certainly not one I took lightly, but it was necessary for my happiness and creative integrity. And who knows, Netflix's live-action adaptation of Avatar has the potential to be good. It might turn out to be a show many of you end up enjoying, but what I can be certain about is that whatever version ends up on screen, it will not be what Bryan and I had envisioned or intended to make. I also want to be clear that this doesn't mean the end of my involvement in the Avatar universe. These stories and characters are important to me, and the renewed interest and excitement in Avatar and Korra has been inspiring to see. Writing this letter has left me with a very heavy heart. I know many of you would be disappointed and frustrated by this news. I get it. I share your disappointment and frustration. I also recognize this creative setback is small compared to the problems we're all facing as a society right now. Thankfully, Iroh offered some wisdom on that too. Sometimes life is like this dark tunnel. You can't always see the light at the end of the tunnel, but if you just keep moving, you'll come to a better place. May we all keep moving and come to a better place. Thanks for reading and for your continued enthusiasm for the Avatar universe. With gratitude, Michael Dante DiMartino. So with Avatar, I don't know. If the original showrunners and creators aren't on board, then I'm not sure that I am either. His live-action remakes are tricky already, so when it comes to Avatar, I think I might have to once again keep my expectations low. The long-term plan for Avatar Studios, however, I'm super excited about. It might take a while, but I'll be patient if it means we get stuff that's much better than we've gotten in the past few years. Like sure, it's a shame it's probably gonna be on Paramount Plus and you need a membership and all that, but just having more Avatar cartoons by the original creators being watchable and enjoyed by many, pretty exciting stuff. And hey, you never know. Even if the Netflix show does suck, it can always have a silver lining here and there. For example, Mike and Bryan claim that despite the frustrating process of the movie, they made tons of business contacts through it, including their agent. Another good thing to come out of it was the actress who played Princess Yue that later went on to voice Asami in The Legend of Korra. A pretty major character, so that's pretty cool too. You know, just thinking about it, it seems like it's kind of like yin and yang. There's always a little good in the bad, and vice versa. The shows themselves also encompassing a diverse book of wisdom to pull from at any time whenever we feel doubtful, scared, or uncertain about the future of anything, especially things we love. But I do have to ask, what does the future of Avatar look like? What we do know is there's going to be a lot more comics, cameos, video games from Avatar Studios, and there's also going to be the Netflix show. And regardless of my optimism or pessimism, I really can't say for sure what's going to happen. One thing I can say with great confidence, however, is that the original show is a timeless example of an animated series that handles serious topics and issues while also making a fun, exciting, and innovative show that people of all ages can love and rewatch forever. That the legacy of the series, regardless of whatever happens in the future, will always be something to look back on in the best way possible. I'm not really the type of person who feels like a bad reboot completely ruins the source material by any means. In fact, after the movie came out, it just made me appreciate the show even more. It made me happy to remember what made the original show so good. I mean, sure, I'll be disappointed, but that feeling fades away after a while. More people will talk about it, the fan base for the show gets bigger, and maybe we realize that a show like this just works better as a cartoon. Who knows? Maybe it just needs a good director, a well-picked cast, and a solid story. Or I guess in other words, the future is a mystery. And maybe that's okay. I still have faith in the fact that Avatar: The Last Airbender will be loved and respected years down the line. So yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to say. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good day or night. And as always, good vibes, everyone. Hey, thanks so much again for watching. Honestly, I've been working on this for a couple weeks now. I just love Avatar so much and I really wanted to talk about it, so if you want to see more stuff like this, let me know. I got a few ideas and I'm excited to finish them. Also, if you'd like to subscribe, feel free. Or if you just want to stop by again sometime, that's cool too. But anyway, feel free to check out my second channel. I've been posting the highlights of the streams we do right here on this channel. Especially Roblox Week is coming up. We've been playing a lot of it lately and honestly, it's pretty fun. Also, feel free to check out my Patreon. I posted a few behind the scenes stuff there and it helps me make these videos. Not to mention Amoeba Network, a channel where we talk about cool free indie games we found on itch.io. Oh, and my Discord server recently had a classic Coke versus Pepsi debate over there. It got pretty heated. If you'd like to share your 2 cents, I'll leave a link to it below. Feel free to come in and say hi. I like to check in there pretty often. Check out my merch shop too. The artist I work with is super talented and I love the stuff we made. Shout out to I'm Kitty K on Twitter who sent me a photo of their Sleepy Penguin sticker they ordered. If you want to be mentioned like this in the next video, send me a picture of something you ordered at Pengicitis1. Links to all this stuff below. I appreciate you being here and I hope you liked it. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.